Sax DMA?
That's correct, John.
Explain to us how a dad, an entrepreneur, a guy from Brooklyn ends up fighting hunger and feeding children in the Philippines his life mission.
That's an interesting question, right? This is a new endeavor for me. Well, I was originally in the Philippines for the first time 2 years ago. It was a random Tinder date. It was just the most random thing in the world. And whenever
online dating, Tinder.
Online dating, yes. I don't know if you want to hear that story.
Hey, listen, it got you to where you are, right?
Should we just go start from the recording studio?
Start from the recording studio.
Okay, so I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I moved here in 1989. Eventually, long story short, whenever I turned to 27, I started working for Jive Records. Jive Records, my first album was the Low End Theory album by Tribe Called Quest. I was working on those albums there back in '93, actually. And I was working for a record company, and I was like, I don't like the corporate environment. I have a rock band. I want to be in a recording studio, but I never even seen a recording studio, But I knew that there was, it's New York City, so there's many recording studios in the area. And I was like, well, I was a father at the time, and I couldn't afford to be an intern. And so I was asking the record label, well, how do you work at a recording studio and make money? Because I need to make money. And they're like, well, you can be a technician. And I'm like, what do they do? And they're like, well, they fix things. I'm like, oh, that's awesome, because my bass player is a technician, and I'll just take his resume, put my name on it, and submit it to this studio called Quad Studios, right? So
this is very resourceful, by the way.
Well, I'm a firm believer in, if somebody ever asks you, presents you with an opportunity, and you don't know how to do it, you say yes, and you figure it out as you go along. Well, sometimes you just got to create your own opportunities, right? So I took this resume, and he was 30 years older than me, so he had 27 years of experience. I was 27 years old at the time, and I gave them this resume, and they're like, you know all of this? I'm like, hell yeah. They're like, is the pay okay? I didn't even know what the pay was. I'm like, pay's fine. They're like, when can you start? I'm like, I can start now. And they're like, we got to get this guy. We got to hire this guy. So they hired me. Mind you, and this is for Quad Recording Studios, just in case, a little backstory on Quad. That's the studio where Tupac had gotten shot at, So there's 3 world-famous recording studios. There's Abbey Road because of the Beatles, Electric Lady because of Jimi Hendrix, and Quad Studios because of Tupac, right? After he got shot there, it became the mecca for hip-hop and R&B. So every artist who's anybody in the hip-hop and R&B field was working there in a 6-studio facility. Well, they assumed that I knew all this knowledge. They gave me a week with the head tech to just catch up with what they had, and I was lost. This is back in the 90s, before computers, whenever there's actual recording gear, And this guy...
You're cutting tape.
Cutting tape, recording on analog gear, using analog equipment. It was just, I'd never even seen this stuff before, And my boss is just a mean guy. He didn't like you, he didn't like me, he didn't like himself, and he could just see right through me. He knew that I did not know anything about this stuff. And he would just explain this in the loftiest terms because he was a men's, he was a genius, And this is what I had to deal with. I'd be like, oh my God, the third day, I'm like, Bill, can you please explain the 10-kilometer adjustment on the MTR 90?
How did you make 3 days?
This was just my training, and I was just trying to take down notes that looked like chicken scratch. It didn't even make any sense to me. And I'd ask him a question. He'd be like, did I explain this to you on your first day? And I was like, oh, my God. So they put me on the night shift by myself, and quickly they realized that I didn't know what I was doing because I was just failing at everything. The sessions would have to be called because I didn't even know how to hook up a microphone, And they're like, we got to replace this guy, So, and I knew they were going to do that, and I saw it coming. So I had to be resourceful. So I started hanging out in the lobby on the 10th floor at the reception area. And eventually I became a teacher and a mentor in the recording industry. And this is one of the biggest lessons I taught my students. So I would hang out on the 10th floor at the reception area. Anybody that walked off the elevator, you know what the artists look like, but you might not know what the producers look like, the management, the A&R, the record label people. You don't know who's going to walk in through those doors. So I immediately would stand up like, hello, my name is Sax. Where can I help you?
Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. What floor are you going to? And they would tell me 6th floor, 8th floor, and I'd say, can we check this person? Because it was security. Can we check this person in? Okay, and then I'd get in the elevator with you, right? And now we have this awkward moment where now we're face-to-face and we have a few silent moments.
That's a moment of opportunity.
Exactly. And then they eventually inevitably would ask me, what do you do here? And I'm like, I play guitar. And they would ask me, are you any good? I say, I'm the best. Once again, I'm not the best, but I played a pretty good guitar, And that's how I started picking up guitar gigs, here and there at the studio. Well, one day, it was dead at the studio, and this really short, chubby black girl comes off the elevator and jump up, what's up, Ma? And I grab her forehead and I kiss her and I go, what's your name? And she goes, Melissa. I'm like, what are you here to see, Melissa? And she's like, I'm here for the 6th floor. I'm like, call down to the 6th floor and see if Melissa can go down there. They're like, yeah, she could go down there. So I get in the elevator with her, and she's like, what do you do here? And I'm like, I make sure you have a good time. And she's like, you're crazy. I'm like, yeah, I heard that before. So she comes in the next day, but the next day the floor is filled with people, right? The floor is packed. And I'm like, Melissa! And I run across the floor and I grab her face, give her a kiss. I'm like, give me the keys to 6. Me and Melissa are going down to 6. And everybody freezes. And I get in the elevator with her and she goes, what do you really do here? I'm like, well, I play guitar. She's like, come down in 30 minutes and talk to me. I'm like, bet. So I get upstairs and everybody's like, how do you know Missy Elliot? I'm like, that was Missy Elliot?
Wow.
I'm like, that was Missy Elliot? You kidding me? All right, I can tell you something. I did get nervous at that point, because I was like, I have no clue, right? So
You didn't have VH1?
I lived in a recording studio.
Yeah.
I was homeless. I was so dedicated to my craft. I was homeless for 6 months. I did not watch TV. I didn't have time to watch TV. I lived at the studio in case any opportunity came up. I was there, and that's how you succeeded in this industry. I've got 1 platinum album, 5 gold albums. I've worked with every major hip hop and R&B artist in the late '90s you can name.
So when did you finally feel like I have done everything I can possibly do here and it's time to look for the next thing?
Eventually, I not only did I was one of the most successful maintenance technicians in the studio, I eventually produced, eventually engineered, and eventually managed the facility as well for the last 2 years. After those last 2, and I thought that managing the facility was going to be like the ultimate, and then I realized that I was just chasing a bunch of artists around for money, and I became disillusioned. So I was like, what, I think it's time to move on here, So I left that and went to nightlife for a few years, produced some amazing parties in New York City. Back in 2016, I was called. This segues into the Fight Hunger with Hunger thing. There was an artist that was in Miami, and she knew of my work in New York City, and she says, I want to hire you for a gig. I want you to produce a subgenre of trap music with rock guitars and build my private recording studio. So understand, I'm coming from New York City. I'm on top of the world, my ego is inflated. I'm up here, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go to Miami. And they put me in the most beautiful condo in Midtown Miami, and I didn't know anybody there, And so I did this album for her and built this studio, and I became very depressed because I was just like everything I had in New York City, it just did not exist there, and I became very, very, very depressed. And so I was like, I never was one for Tinder or like online dating, so let me try this Tinder thing, right? So I meet this Philippine model in Orlando, and I'm in Miami, and we just immediately start having a phone conversation, which was foreign to me. I'm like, I never used the phone before, and I was awkward, I never talked on the phone for like who knows how many years.
And you recognize too, we live in a day and age of catfishing and this 90-day fiance, and
yeah.
I assume that you had suspicions.
Well, I just wanted to meet somebody, to be honest with you, at that point, and she was like, well, but we were never able actually to physically meet. Like anytime I tried to get a car to go up there, something went wrong. It just didn't work out. But we maintained a phone conversation, right? Eventually, she had to leave, and she was like, well, I'm going to go to New York City, but I don't know anybody. I'm like, well, you're talking to the right person. You're a model. I introduced her to 3 photographers, a small group of friends. She got up there. She had a blast. She's like, dude, you're the man up here. I'm like, yes, I know. And but before she had left, she had gotten pickpocketed in the airport, and she lost her passport. I don't know how she was able to travel, but she had lost her passport, right? So she goes to New York, and eventually she goes back to the Philippines. Well, I literally have 2 more days in Miami, and I'm ready to return back to New York City, And
anyway, that was the plan.
That was the plan. And I'm not even in Miami at this particular moment. I'm in a place called Homestead, which is about an hour south of Miami, in this random city, right? And my phone rings, and it's from the Philippines, and it's her. And I'm like, hey, how are you? She's like, are you still in Miami by any chance? I'm like, yes. She's like, do you happen to know where this post office is? And I'm like, I'm looking right at it. I'm right in front of it. And she's like, my passport is there. Can you please get it for me? I'm like, yes, that's crazy, So I go, and she calls and says, hey, this guy's going to pick up my passport. So I get the passport. 2 days later, I go to New York. I'm like, of course I'm going to FedEx it to you. No problem. She's like, dude, you're the coolest guy in the world. If you ever want to come out here, you let me know. I'm like, I'm booking my ticket now. Like, I've never been out the country before. Well, I was in the country.
So she's home. She's in the Philippines.
Yeah,
at this time.
she's in the Philippines, And so I booked my ticket. A few weeks later, I'm going out there and stuff, So I go out there. And I thought, I've never been outside the country. And I'm like, I'm thinking Philippines. It's Asia, right? So it's going to be this Asian country and like really mysterious and like cool. And I was in Manila, and it was just disgusting. It was gross. It looked like Jamaica Queens on a bad day. It was like really horrible. I was like, man, I really hope we get along because I'm ready to go back home. This is just depressing, this town, And well, we met up. We hit it off great. She stayed with me the whole 6 days I was there and showed me around and everything. And I was just destroyed. I was just I was destroyed. My soul was destroyed by seeing the amount of poverty there in this country, and it was I mean, it's everywhere you go. I mean, children, they're just like living. I don't even know how they're living, you know. And you know, she had told me that, you know, what she does is she does these things called feedings. Like she'll scrape up a little bit of money and put together, you know, a little thing and the food, and they get somebody to prepare the food, and she'll go to these communities and feed these children. And I'm like, man, that's like a really cool idea, you know. And she was like, hey, would you like to start a nonprofit with me? And I'm like, well, I would like to, but I don't really think you understand how much of a responsibility that is. But it put the idea in my mind, you know, like, man, it would probably be pretty awesome to be partnered up with a nonprofit out here, you know, because I could really see
how quickly after landing in Manila did you realize that there was a need for intervention?
It was probably the next day, because it's just literally everywhere.
It's prevalent.
It's insane. It's really bad. Yeah, it's like this from what I hear all over the world. You know, it's not just the Philippines. You know, but
we'll talk more about that.
Yeah. So I had this idea of this nonprofit in my head, and I'm like, man, you know, I meditate a lot. I visualize. You know, I visualize.
Tell us a little bit about that, because I happen to know I have people in my life who consider meditation integral. I mean, absolutely 100% necessary, and almost look at people who don't do it, like myself, I admit it. I do a little yoga, but I don't meditate. And my mother-in-law looks at me like I am waking up every day at a deficit by not meditating. You notice a difference?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And what would someone like me notice?
Well, first of all, there's many,
because it's obviously important if you brought it up.
Absolutely.